שיש לה מבוססת שנמצאת פה, ולצד זה גם להביא לפה יותר צעירים, יותר ילדים.
I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and this is I-24 News. We are opening with breaking news. It is official. The Hezbollah terror group has confirmed that its leader, Hassan Nasrallah, has been killed in an Israeli airstrike in the Lebanese capital of Beirut. Now, this is major news that has shaken the Middle East. It comes after the IDF conducted a massive airstrike on Hezbollah's main headquarters in Beirut yesterday evening, where Nasrallah was gathered with other top Hezbollah commanders. Now, this attack leveled 6 buildings, and it marks the heaviest response from Israel in Beirut since Hezbollah started firing rockets into Israel on October 8th of 2023. That was just a day after Hamas's attack on southern Israel. Well, Lebanese health officials say that 6 people were killed and over 90 were injured in the strike. Hezbollah has fired over 9,000 rockets into Israel over the course of the last year. But the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah escalated sharply over the last 2 weeks, with Israeli attacks and airstrikes on the terror group killing more than 800 people in Lebanon, according to the Lebanese health ministry. Now, this figure does not distinguish between combatants and civilians, and Israel says that most of the dead are Hezbollah fighters. Hezbollah and Iran are now vowing a strong response, and the Lebanese terror group has been firing rockets into Israel and the West Bank throughout the day. Let's turn now to northern Israel, right on the border with Lebanon, where our correspondent Zach Anders is joining us live. Zach, what is the latest? How much rocket fire have we been seeing today?
Well, I just got from the IDF 100 rockets approximately have been fired from Lebanon into Israel. At this point in the day, we've noted several large attacks once again into the Safad area. Safad has been under constant daily rocket attacks in the last 10 days since this full scale began. What we're seeing out of Hezbollah messaging, of course, they have accepted and stated that Hassan Nasrallah is dead. They have resumed their regular messaging. They are now claiming that there have been 8 attacks throughout the day that they have fired on northern Israel. Again, most of this is contained in northern Israel. Some of the questions that we have that are unanswered at this point into the IDF. What is out there? What is the next big fish for this fight? Where is this fight going? We noted right after the Nasrallah's targeted assassination in this Beirut suburb that within a few hours there was approximately 20 additional strikes throughout the neighborhood after the IDF issued further evacuation notices telling people to flee from Dahiya, this Hezbollah stronghold neighborhood. Those strikes have since subsided. Beirut has gone quiet for now, but we, of course, are watching and trying to understand where the IDF plans to take this next. We know that there is still a vast arsenal of ballistic missiles and long-range rockets, even cruise missiles, anti-ship missiles, that I am aware through my sources are still out there, that are still left to be destroyed. And it sounds like, from what I can gather, this is just my interpretation based on these conversations, that the remaining weaponry in Hezbollah's arsenal is deep underground. And from what we can tell, some semblance of a command structure still exists within Hezbollah to be able to communicate these orders to fire some of these attacks after Nasrallah's death, which is interesting because it does appear that by Nasrallah being there with so many other high-level IRGC and Hezbollah leadership, that he was still very actively involved in planning some of these attacks up to the very last minute. Otherwise, there would really be no purpose for him to be meeting in person with so many other head figures to be able to essentially dictate the next steps. So that's what we're looking for right now. Again, Hezbollah has claimed responsibility for 8 attacks at this point in the day, some 100 rockets fired after Hassan Nasrallah's death.
What instructions has the Israeli Home Front Command given to the Israeli public at this point, from what we understand?
Well, we do have an additional update from Home Front Command as of today. For most of these communities, the usual suspects north into the Galilee, into the Golan as well, everything along the border. All schools closed, workplaces are being asked to limit gatherings, and no gatherings upwards of 10 people outdoors. I'm a bit surprised by this, Natasha, to be honest, considering this is essentially the same Home Front Command status that's been issued throughout the duration of this conflict. No special orders given for the folks that are living inside the evacuation zone or that are still inside this evacuated zone. Essentially, it is similar to the Home Front Command notice that we received in the hours leading up to the Nasrallah assassination. So going forward, I've been asking throughout the day, trying to understand if there is any greater threat posed in these coming hours based on the current situation, the current climate throughout the Middle East. And I'm right now getting similar responses that no, we're watching, we're waiting, and if there's anything that changes, that will be immediately communicated to the Israeli public and the world at large. Right. But right now, no immediate threat is being communicated through any of the official structures here inside Israel.
All right. That's Zach Anders joining us from northern Israel, and we're going to be back with you within the coming hours. Just another update that he slightly mentioned, there is a new instruction from the Home Front Command that gatherings of less than 1,000 people are only allowed within the center of Israel. So clearly there is some concern about the type of targeting of central Israel that we could see in the coming hours. But we're going to turn now to the name that is all over the headlines. Hassan Nasrallah. He's been the leader of the Iran-backed Lebanese terror group since 1992, and he's known for shaping Hezbollah's strategy against Israel. But who was he, and what has his influence meant for not only Israel, but also for Lebanon and the Middle East? And how is his assassination now going to impact that? Well, our Lynn Plachmeyer has the details.
Allahu Akbar.
The IDF confirmed that Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah has been killed in a Beirut airstrike on September 27. Nasrallah was born in 1960. He was a radical clerk who oversaw Hezbollah's transformation into a military force. Becoming Israel's arch-enemy, he shaped alliances with Iran and terror groups like Hamas. Nasrallah became Hezbollah's leader only in 1992 at the age of 35. Hezbollah was the first group that Iran backed in its push to spread its political Islam. His reign is mostly defined by Hezbollah's fight with Israel. In 2006, he declared, quote, divine victory after 34 days of war with Israel, winning the respect from many ordinary citizens. But he became a divisive figure when Hezbollah's operations widened to Syria, where it fought in support of Assad. The terror group's actions led to a shunning of Gulf states, which contributed to the collapse of Lebanon's economy in 2019. In the years after 2006, Hezbollah stocked up on Iranian rockets and missiles, which were used on October 8 after Hamas launched its deadly attack on Israel.
We have to all cooperate to help the people of Gaza to rebuild Gaza and to alleviate them from their suffering without any limits and conditions.
But he did not only make an enemy out of Israel. In 2008, he accused the Lebanese government, backed by Saudi Arabia and the West, of declaring war by moving to ban Hezbollah's international communication network. It prompted a 4-day civil war against Sunni and Druze fighters. He also was accused of being involved in the 2005 assassination of former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik al-Hariri. Furthermore, he expressed fierce opposition to Saudi's war against the Houthis in Yemen. And in 2020, he vowed that U.S. soldiers would leave the region in coffins after the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani was killed in a U.S. drone strike.
A fair punishment is, with all transparency and clarity, the targeting of the U.S. military presence in the region.
Despite the power he yielded, Nasrallah lived in hiding for most of his life. The last speech he gave from his Beirut bunker was after the attack that blew up thousands of pagers of Hezbollah members, wounding a significant amount of fighters.
We were subjected to a huge and severe blow, but this is the nature of war and the nature of conflict. And we know that our enemy has superiority, and we have never once said anything other than that. Superiority on the technological level. The only path forward is to stop the aggression and war on the people of Gaza and the Gaza Strip, and consequently on the West Bank. That is the only path.
Now that his rule has ended, the future of Hezbollah hangs in the balance.
Joining us now in the studio is our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran and Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves Doron Avitala, former commander in the IDF Special Forces. All right, so I think the first big question that everybody has is, what does it mean that Hezbollah has officially acknowledged Nasrallah's death?
That it is capable of telling the truth and confronting it. And that he is indeed dead, yes, that is for certain. But Hezbollah, and following what we heard from Zach describing the reality on the ground, Hezbollah does seem to be somewhat disoriented and disorganized. I mean, its top chain of command and control has been completely wiped off. And yes, they are capable of launching rockets at Israel, and they are capable of reaching further distances. That's on a tactical level. But as far as a strategic level is concerned, they are currently acting without a head, without heads.
Right. Well, the question is, of course, I mean, what does this mean for the future of the strength of the terror group? Because you would imagine that there is some type of plan B that has been in place in the case that Nasrallah is taken out. He's been a major Israeli target for decades now. So what happens next here?
He was indeed an arch-terrorist, perhaps one of the biggest terrorists to have ever walked this planet. And the world is a safer place without Hassan Nasrallah. That's to set the record straight. But as far as the future of Hezbollah, first of all, we have to remember it is Iran's strongest proxy. And Nasrallah, for decades, remained the Lebanese anchor of that proxy, giving it an appearance of Lebanese locality. Yes, the majority or almost all its members are Lebanese, but it was always torn between that allegiance to Lebanon, even though it led to its current failing situation and a lot of its destruction in recent months, and its loyalty to its backers in Iran. And with the elimination of Nasrallah, who has been described by many in the defense establishment as the one who has kept often Iranian aspirations to increase attacks against Israel at bay, him leaving the picture raises the question, is Hezbollah now, the Hezbollah that we know is no longer in existence. Nasrallah shaped the organization in his image. The question is now, is the new Hezbollah going to be a more Lebanese-oriented organization and perhaps would be more succumb to local government pressure if that does come, or in fact become more under Iran and have Tehran increase its influence on the terror organization? If we look at the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's response, he said that the axis of resistance, the factions across the different proxies, they will determine the response and how to move forward. That could be a way to distance himself. But at the end of the day, I think that is the major question moving forward at this point.
Right. And I want to get to that shortly, but I do want to talk about the fact that we saw in Dayet, which is a Shiite suburb of Beirut, that this essentially remained the headquarters of Hezbollah for a very, very, very long time. Why not hide in areas where there are other populations, Sunnis, Christians, for example? Why were all these Hezbollah commanders gathering in an area that they know Israeli intelligence is clearly aware of, maybe not exactly when Nasrallah was going to arrive, but we now know that there are reports coming out that there was Israeli intelligence, an understanding of where Nasrallah was for months now. He was believed to be actually there underground for quite some time. So what does it say to us that all these commanders that have been consistently targeted by Israel were all in that exact same location in Lebanon?
No, we have to understand Hezbollah is a Shiite organization, as you said, Lebanese, of course a proxy of of Iran. But it sits within the community of the Shiites, even the Shiites in the south. When we talk about clearing the buffer zone in the south, we shouldn't forget that many of those Hezbollah leaders actually live in the south, in those villages. So the same goes for Nasrallah, for sure. This was the headquarters, the Dahia. In 2006 was this major attack on the Dahia. I remember Eisenkot called it the thesis, the Dahia thesis. When they attack Haifa, we attack Beirut. Now, they really were counting on this headquarters being located so deep in the ground. It's not the technological, what required in order to establish such an attack in such depth. It's something very, very serious. We have shown it in the previous attack with the second in command, and we've shown it now. This is not an easy thing. It felt pretty safe. And the other layer, which is clearly the intelligence. We really know about their whereabouts because he moves around. He's not staying in his bunker, operating all the time. So we knew that there's a window of opportunity that is there, and this is where the decision to allocate the decision when and how to do it, and this was when the decision was made.
Very, very quick response.
I want to add, just like Hamas, they use their own people as human shields, but at the end of the day, you have to remember that unlike Hamas, they are not the legitimate sovereigns of Lebanon, and so they have to use the cover of their local communities to act freely under them. So they used their people basically not only as human shields, but also in order to provide them cover from the state.
But we have to say frankly, I mean, they are in many respects the representatives, so-called, of the Shiite population in Lebanon.
Well,
they're also politically. And of course, they took the organization and the representative of the Shia to this direction, being proxy of Iran and this alliance, which is new. You have to remember that in '82, when we entered Lebanon as paratroopers, the Shiites accepted the Israelis as the liberators from the PLO hold. And then things have changed, and Hezbollah became our enemy.
Right.
This is the changing nature of the war in the Middle East.
Well, it's certainly going to be interesting, and we're going to discuss this shortly with some guests out of Lebanon, basically what this means in terms of the public support for Hezbollah. But we're going to turn quickly to Haifa. That's Israel's largest city in the north, which has come under heavy fire in recent days. Our correspondent, Nicole Tzedek, is joining us live from there. Now, Nicole, until last week, Hezbollah was not targeting Haifa, but that has changed significantly. Give us a sense of why and how the city has been affected so far today.
So today, surprisingly for many of the residents here, no sirens have sounded in Haifa, but all of the surrounding areas, sirens have sounded, and the residents feel like it's just a matter of time before the next siren sound and they're forced to run to the shelter again. And up until now, we hadn't really seen these sirens sounding for the majority of the 11 months of this war, but as things are changing and the intensifying over the past several days, Haifa will likely become more and more of a target. And there's multiple reasons for this, Natasha. One of them, not only is it the largest city in the north, it's the third largest city in the entire country, all of Israel. So every time there are rockets, missiles, projectiles fired here towards Haifa, there are hundreds of thousands of residents who have 1 minute to run to their shelter. However, unfortunately, that's the reality for all of the residents in the north right now. So the two larger problems are the military infrastructure in the area. We have a naval base, an air force base in the area, and Hezbollah continues to say that this military infrastructure are places that they will target as the war does escalate. But more concerning for many of the civilians and residents here are actually the different industrial plants and factories. Haifa is an industrial zone, and so there are many different types of chemical plants that are here. According to some research from the Haifa Environmental Research Center a few years ago, they said that there's 1,500 different high-risk areas with more than 800 different types of dangerous chemicals that could easily become a target for Hezbollah. Because if some of these plants are targeted, the chemical reaction that could come, that is what many of the residents are concerned about. Right. One of the main plants here is an ammonia plant that Nasrallah himself, back in 2016, vowed to go after and attack, and he said that it would be like an exploding in a nuclear bomb. Now, that's not necessarily the case, and since then, Haifa and Israel has taken steps to mitigate that risk, even over the course of the past year. Different plants say that they have had different instructions from the army, possibly moving some of the different hazardous material out of the plants to make it not so dangerous if it was to be attacked, but the information surrounding that, it's not necessarily public, and so that's what concerns many of the residents, because they don't know how much hazardous material is inside these plants, exactly where it's located, and what damage could be caused if it is attacked and targeted by Hezbollah.
Just quickly, what are locals saying, if anything? Are there fears right now about a big reprisal from Hezbollah?
It's mixed emotions, Natasha. On the one hand, many of them are feeling a little bit celebratory and proud of the military actions from Israel. But on the other hand, they know that because of those military actions, it's likely that Haifa could become under fire next. And so we're not seeing too many people out here. It's mainly journalists here overlooking the Haifa promenade. But still, some families, some people walking about. And as I'm speaking to them, they say that they're not living in fear per se, but they are ready and they know that all of their shelter is prepared. And unfortunately, it won't be the first or likely the last time that they are forced to run to a shelter. And so it's just a very, very tense time. They say probably the tensest time they felt throughout the entire year of this war and of these attacks from Hezbollah.
All right, Nicole Tzedek joining us from Haifa in northern Israel. We're going to be back with you later on throughout this evening. We're turning now to Lebanon, where the public is reeling as the IDF continues to strike Hezbollah targets across the country. Now, Lebanese officials say that nearly 800 people have been killed in Israeli strikes in Lebanon since Monday, without specifying between Hezbollah operatives and civilians. But the IDF says that the majority of the dead are Hezbollah targets. At the same time, reports are coming out of Lebanon of locals being displaced overnight from the southern Shiite suburbs of Beirut, where Hezbollah infrastructure is primarily located. And Lebanon's transport ministry has also said that an Iranian cargo plane needed to turn around following threats from Israel that it would be targeted for carrying weapons, while the EU has said that airlines should avoid Lebanese and Israeli airspace for the next month at least. In regards to displacement, we also know that over 50,000 people have crossed into Syria from Lebanon since Israel intensified its airstrikes across the country, and there are currently about 200,000 people who are internally displaced. Well, joining us now is David Daoud. He's a Hezbollah and Lebanon senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. So what are we hearing from the Lebanese public right now, especially in regards to Nasrallah's killing? Are locals supportive or are they angry about this?
Thank you for having me on. I think it really depends on what you mean when you say Lebanese public. Let's even take Saad Hariri, who was the son of former Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri, who was assassinated by Hezbollah in 2005. Saad Hariri is condemning the assassination, calling it a cowardly act and saying that the Lebanese must all unite to get their country through the challenges through which it's going. And again, this is a man whose own father was assassinated by Hezbollah. There are other Lebanese who are doubtlessly celebrating. I have friends, and this is anecdotal, but I have friends sending me text messages saying, this is great. Can you finish off some more? And I think it doesn't even break down by sect necessarily. You could have the Sunnis of Tripoli because of their sympathies with the people of Syria who were slaughtered at the hands of Hezbollah who are celebrating. And you could have Christians who are more sympathetic to Hezbollah throughout this period who are condemning this assassination. So it's a very complex image. And the people that you would expect to be coming out against it aren't necessarily doing so.
What kind of damage are we seeing in Lebanon at this point, especially following this specific airstrike?
So the airstrike that killed Nasrallah took down 6 buildings. It was obvious this was a high-value target. Once you hear that, right, the Israelis were clearly trying to make sure that whomever was being targeted would not be able to escape this assassination attempt. And then throughout the night and into the early mornings, Lebanon time, your local time, there were airstrikes striking different parts of Dahi, South Beirut, where Hezbollah has offices and infrastructure and has stored weapons. There were strikes throughout the Bekaa. There were strikes in South Lebanon, in and near the city of Tyre. Targeting Hezbollah positions and Hezbollah's arsenal. I wouldn't say tremendous damage in the sense of if we're comparing this to, say, Gaza, but because Hezbollah's infrastructure is more localized, and the Israelis haven't intensified to a Gaza-level campaign in Lebanon yet, but there has been significant damage to the areas where Hezbollah has stored its weapons and is entrenching its personnel.
What are we hearing from the Lebanese government more specifically? I mean, how will Nasrallah's killing impact their strength in the country?
Again, I think if we're expecting or betting on the Lebanese government to suddenly fill the vacuum, first of all, Nasrallah's killing doesn't mean that Hezbollah is down for the count. They are a professional organization. They've been around for 40 years. There is a hierarchy. If Hashim Safi ad-Din still survives, the head of the executive council. He's not as loved, if you will, in Hezbollah's support circle, a figure as Hassan Nasrallah, but he is an excellent organizer. He will be able to fill those shoes and from an administrative standpoint. So Hezbollah is not down for the count, and I think the Lebanese, the general sense is that they will not act. They want someone else to act for them to get rid of Hezbollah. So if we're expecting the Lebanese state or civil society or independent groups or whomever to start filling the void or to take this as an opportunity, not just Nasrallah's assassination, but the activities of Israel over the past 2 weeks that have been a significant setback to Hezbollah, as a prompt to push back on the organization, I think we will be sorely disappointed.
Right. You know, of course, Israel's bracing for a potential reprisal from Hezbollah, also from Iran. But I guess my question is whether or not the Lebanese public actually wants to see that happen at this point. And is there any talk of a potential ceasefire?
I don't think the Lebanese public, irrespective of their feelings on Hezbollah, irrespective of their feelings on this assassination, irrespective of their feelings on Israel and the Palestinian issue, want to see a full war. At the same time, Hezbollah isn't really taking a referendum before it does these things. I don't anticipate escalation, a massive escalation to war, but I could be wrong. Really, the calculus is going to be very difficult to assess moving forward. But the Lebanese public certainly don't want this to go to a full war, again, irrespective of where they fall on the support or opposition to Hezbollah spectrum.
All right, David Daoud joining us from Washington, D.C. I'd like to thank you so much for your insight. We are turning now to a little more background on the Hezbollah top leaders that have been targeted by Israel since October 8th. Now, Hassan Nasrallah was not the only one targeted in Israel's airstrike in Beirut last night. Since October 8th, Israel has been targeting Hezbollah's top leaders in targeted attacks in response to near daily rocket fire from the terror group into northern Israel. And here is who the IDF has taken out so far.
As airstrikes leveled several buildings in Beirut's Dahia suburbs Friday night, it became clear that the Israeli Air Force was now targeting the headquarters of Hezbollah, and with it, its leader Hassan Nasrallah. Together with Nasrallah was Ali Karki, the commander of Hezbollah's southern front, and other top Radwan officials. The Radwan force spearheaded Hezbollah's ground operations in South Lebanon. Leading up to Friday's attack was months of precise intelligence and intensified airstrikes that eliminated leaders across the Iran-backed terror group's chain of command, which has been firing rockets and drones across Lebanon's southern border into Israel for almost a year. Ibrahim Akil led the military activities of Hezbollah, serving as the Radwan force's acting commander. Ahmed Wahbi, identified by Hezbollah and the IDF as the head of the terror group's training unit and a former commander of the Radwan force. Wabi was allegedly involved in both advancing Hezbollah's entrenchment in southern Lebanon and the preparation of a Hezbollah invasion of the Galilee, according to the IDF. Ibrahim Kubaisi, the commander of the terror group's rocket and missile division. Fuad Shukr, Hezbollah's most senior military commander and a right-hand man to terror leader Hassan Nasrallah. Shukr was responsible for the Golan Heights soccer field strike that killed 12 children and was wanted by the U.S. for his part in the 1983 Marines barracks bombing. Wissam al-Tawil was the elite Hezbollah commander, played a central role in some of the terror group's most high-profile attacks, including a deadly 2006 cross-border raid that triggered the Second Lebanon War. Mohammed Sroor was the head of Hezbollah's drone unit, also handling organizational responsibilities within Hezbollah. Abu Talib was the terror group's commander for the central region of the southern border strip. Mohammed Nasser led terror group's Aziz unit. Abu Hassan Samir served as the head of the Radwan Force training unit. He held various positions within the terrorist organization and was commander of the Radwan Force for a decade. In the military chain of command released by the IDF, Abu Ali Rida, head of Hezbollah's Badr unit, which oversees the region north of the Litani River up to the city of Sidon, is shown as the only remaining regional Hezbollah commander. An ominous image as the IDF announces that there is still more to be done.
This is not the end of the toolbox. It should be very clear. There are more tools we can use ahead. The message is a simple one. Whoever threatens the citizens of the State of Israel, we will know how to get there, in the north, in the south, even in more distant places.
All right. Well, still with us in the studio is our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran and Lieutenant Colonel Doron in the reserves, Doron Avital. All right. So I think there are just so many questions that we need to cover here. Obviously, we have seen much of Hezbollah's leadership structure taken out in these targeted airstrikes and attacks. The question is, what kind of response can we expect from the terror group at this point? What should Israelis be prepared for?
Yeah, I think Herzl was very clear what our strategy is. We continue to degrade their weapon ricochets. We hit in Baalbek, we hit in the south, and we hit in Beirut again, because we know about weaponry that is being, even in the Dahia, in those, for example, sea-to-sea, ground-to-sea missiles, for example. So we have to continue the pressure. We still have the question of what to do in the south, whether to think, consider, and when a ground troops movement. In the meantime, I don't think we are rushing into doing it. And we have to be very prepared within our, to expect what kind of response they can generate. In the meantime, they don't generate not the volume and not the kind of precision we expected from them. So it's not clear whether they still have something that they are hiding from us and they still have something to show. It's not clear, but we have to be prepared for all options. Also, from other forces joining, the Houthis, the Shia militia, and then the big question, what would Iran do next?
Right, and that is, of course, the question. We have basically seen multiple statements come out of the Islamic Republic of Iran, essentially saying that, you know, we are going to make sure that all of our resistance forces come together in some type of larger coordinated response. Obviously, that direct attack that we saw back in April from Iranian territory to Israel, which included the Houthis, included Iran-backed forces out of Iraq, didn't really make a very big impact on the state of Israel. So the question is, what is the next level that this could be taken to?
I think it's also important to know the last speech of Nasrallah when he talked about the technological superiority that Israel, and not only Israel, the whole allies has versus Hezbollah and Iran. I think this is something that if we think about the way we were thinking about Iran and its mighty powers and so on, and Hezbollah before those last few months, we have to reconsider and really evaluate what kind of the balance of power. We really have a decisive technological superiority and a decisive intelligence superiority that we can use to our benefit. But still, never undermine the enemy. They have to recalibrate and see what to do. We saw that Iran is completely intelligence-wise penetrated by our agencies. We saw it with the Hania case, in case we did it, and in other cases. And we saw it now with Hezbollah. We actually succeeded. Think about that. Every leader in the top echelon to really find him, to know where exactly he is and where do they convene, and then to hit them. This is impressive operational capabilities that we didn't show in the beginning of the war, for sure.
Well, it's certainly interesting because on one hand, you know, obviously, I think for the Israeli public as well, this is a major relief, in a sense, following what happened on October 7th. There was not only kind of a public reckoning as to the strength of the IDF on October 7th, the feeling that, wait a second, the Israeli military isn't as strong, but also kind of that messaging was being sent out to the rest of the Arab world, Iran and its proxy groups, that, wait a second, Israel isn't as strong as we once thought. That seems, in a certain sense, to now be flipped by the events that we've seen over the course of the past 2 weeks. But then there's the other aspect, which is kind of the international image of what Israel has become here and what that means. If, you know, all of a sudden there's the perception that Iran perhaps isn't as strong as everybody thought that it was, is Israel going to be getting that same support, per se, from the United States, from other Western powers in the case that there is a larger war?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, first of all, the prospect of a regional conflict and a bigger war, everybody discuss it. It's, of course, it's an optional thing. You have the whole spectrum from this is the end of the end of the major level of the conflict to a regional conflict to a global war. Everybody talks in this fashion. Of course, what we have to do, what is our strategy, should be very clear. We have the hostage deal and the whole thing to close in Gaza. We have to close this story. This story is an open wound. We didn't close it. It should be clear. We have to make sure that we can bring our citizens to the north. It means to create this buffer zone, either by using air power or whatever other means, or diplomatically, keep degrading Hezbollah until some kind of agreement is achieved, and look forward how to work with our coalition in the grand context of things between Iran, Shia militia in Iraq, and the Houthis. This is a coalition story, and we have to understand it.
Yeah.
We shouldn't forget that Iran, though looks weak now, has backers, has China backing it up, has Russia. We have to think about this also.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. And Ariel, I did not forget about you. I see you sitting right here, but we are actually going to start discussing Iran's role in all of this, and I know that you have a lot to say on that. So the Islamic Republic of Iran has been quick to threaten Israel with a reprisal following the killing of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. The Iranian Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has called on Muslims today to stand with the people of Lebanon. And have a listen to what he had to say.
In the name of Allah, the Merciful, the killing of defenseless people in Lebanon once again revealed to everyone the ferocity of the rabid Zionist dog and proved the short-sightedness and stupid policy of the leaders of the usurping regime. The terror gang ruling the Zionist regime did not learn from their year of criminal war in Gaza and failed to understand that the mass killing of women, children, and civilians cannot affect the solid construction of the resistance organization and destroy it. Now they are trying the same foolish policy in Lebanon. The Zionist criminals should know that they are too small to cause significant damage to the strong structure of Hezbollah in Lebanon. All the resistance forces of the region are with Hezbollah and support it.
Well, the Iranian media has now announced the death of the commander of the Al-Quds force in Lebanon, Abbas Nilfaroshan. He replaced the IRGC commander Mohammad Reza Zahedi, who was killed in Damascus. And the fact that the leader of Hezbollah is dead is not just a big deal for Lebanon. It's a game changer in terms of the future of the Middle East, and more importantly, for the Islamic Republic of Iran, which has been funding and backing Hezbollah since day one. The Lebanese terror group and political party has been one of Iran's strongest assets in maintaining an influence in the region and instilling fear in Israel. So with Hezbollah essentially decapitated, what will this mean for the Islamic Republic's future? Well, joining us now is Dr. Meir Javed-Nafar, an Iran lecturer at the Reichman University. So I'd like to start with Iran saying they're going to be sending over forces to Lebanon right now. How far is the Islamic Republic actually willing to go to support Hezbollah at this point?
Islamic Republic of Iran is under tremendous pressure. Its leader is about to attend another burial ceremony of another former senior member of the Axis of Resistance. Over the last number of years, he has been to too many of these burial ceremonies, and it seems that as far as the Iranians see it, Israel is not willing to respect any of their red lines. So on the one hand, there is pressure on Ayatollah Khamenei to attack Israel, to establish deterrence, because the way some Iranian hardliners see it, Israel is not deterred. For Israel, there is no red line. They accuse Israel of assassinating Hania right in the middle of northern Tehran. And now they're accusing Israel of, and now Israel has taken responsibility also of killing Iran's most important regional ally, Mr. Nasrallah, and a senior Iranian Quds force commander. So he's under pressure to react. Otherwise, they are concerned that Israel will carry out even more operations, daring operations against the Iranian regime. But there are also people inside Iran who are against retaliating directly against Israel, including, I think, Khamenei, because 80 out of 88 million of Iran's population at least are against the regime. There are power cuts. There's going to be a gas shortage in this winter, despite the fact that Iran has the world's second biggest gas reserves. So with overwhelming majority of Iranians against the regime could, in fact, risk this instability domestically if it enters a war against Israel.
Right. That's actually exactly what I want you to talk a little bit more about. How does the internal political situation in Iran actually impact the Islamic Republic's support for Hezbollah and its other proxy groups at this point? I mean, like you mentioned, Iran is facing a major economic crisis right now, and it is clear that Pezeshkian wants there to be more of a focus on local issues rather than regional ones.
First of all, there's incredible amount of joy among Iranians, among the Iranian public, from my understanding, that Mr. Nasrallah is no more. He was deeply hated by overwhelming majority of Iranians, because he was viewed as a kind of a leech who was taking away Iran's money, taking money, at least something between $200 million to $800 million a year. Some people say even $1 billion a year, which Iranians believe should have stayed in Iran and should have served the Iranian public. Instead, Mr. Nasrallah was using this money to build an army which was isolating Iran. His operations were isolating Iran, getting Iran under tougher sanctions, thus making it more difficult for the Iranian public to do business with the outside world. And this is the situation right now for the Iranians. Mr. Pezeshkian wants to improve relations with the international community, but because organizations such as the axis of those belonging to the axis of resistance are under the direction of the supreme leader, and their actions are in direct confrontation with the US and Israel, this will make it very difficult for Iran to remove sanctions and to improve its economy.
Now, I'm interested to kind of hear your input as to how Russia and China are going to respond to this new order that we may now be seeing in the Middle East, and their loyalty more specifically to Iran, which seems to be weakening following Israel's major offensive in Lebanon.
I don't think the Chinese and the Russians' loyalty is weakening to Iran. I think they see Iran as an important regional, albeit junior, partner in the confrontation against the West, in the confrontation against the West's allies. And I think they're going to continue supporting Iran. The Russians are, according to newspaper reports, about to supply very sophisticated anti-ship missiles to the Houthis, which will make Bab el-Mandeb Strait even more dangerous. More ships could be hit. More trade could basically end up, cargo ships could end up at the bottom of the sea. This will push up inflationary pressures on the Western economies, and that's a serious issue. And I think we in Israel, if I can refer to your previous question, should note that one of the reasons why Iran is doing
it looks like we're having sirens in the Tel Aviv area. Unfortunately, we're going to have to cut you off. Thank you so much for joining us. There are sirens right now in Tel Aviv. It looks like we're going to be... Do you guys want to stay in the studio right now for this, or do you want to go into the bomb shelter right now? Okay. All right. We are staying inside the studio for this right now. We are seeing red alerts in the area. Is the control room moving?
We don't room.
What is the plan?
We don't run. I can stay online.
We're continuing to stay on air right now? Okay. So, we obviously heard, a warning from the IDF Home Front Command that their gatherings of more than 1,000 people are no longer going to be permitted within the coming 2 days within central Israel. It looks like there was clearly some type of intelligence in regards to the fact that there would be rocket barrages right now on the center. Of course, we don't know who this is coming from. If this is from Hezbollah, it could be from one of the Houthis, for example, like we saw the other day.
What's important is that the Israelis in those areas that they heard sirens head to shelters. We're talking about the greater Tel Aviv area, right. As far as Modi'in, Maccabim. This is the biggest metropolitan area.
We're hearing actually reports now that this is not from Hezbollah, but again, we are going to wait for a confirmation on that at this point.
For Israelis heading to the shelters, it's all the same.
Exactly.
This information.
Absolutely. You probably shouldn't be doing what we're doing right now, which is staying in the studio, continuing, but it is important, obviously, for us to ensure that the world sees the reality of what is happening here right now in the state of Israel. Obviously, throughout the day, we've been seeing rocket barrages from the north, out of Lebanon, into not only northern Israel, but also the West Bank. There was also a surface-to-air missile that was intercepted over Tzfat. That's in northern Israel. At this point, what do we know about the weapons that Hezbollah has access to? What has Israel actually successfully taken out? And when we're talking about these long-range missiles, the ballistic missiles that Israelis are perhaps the most fearful of, what is left in the arsenal?
Still a lot. I mean, Israel has been targeting systematically Hezbollah's launch capabilities since Hezbollah opened war unilaterally against Israel on October 8th. But this has ramped up over the past 2 weeks. We can't give an exact number. We're talking if indeed it is a significant damage that would appear as far as the scale of Israel's strikes, we could be talking about close to 10%, but I don't want to put a number on it, because at the end of the day, we have not seen Hezbollah utilize its full-time war capabilities. Right. This is something that could be a decision that was made by Hezbollah and Iran, or will be made, to indeed reach for those heavier missiles, more precise rockets. But at the end of the day, that was left for a last-ditch effort. A lot of these missiles are also considered to be Iranian missiles for a rainy day if Israel were to decide to target Iran's nuclear facilities on Iranian soil. Israel, to the best of my knowledge, has not really targeted those capabilities, because that would be registered in Tehran as a direct strike on Iran. But if you're talking about the IRGC commander responsible for Lebanon and Syria being eliminated in last night's strike, he replaced his predecessor was eliminated in January in the Iranian consulate in Damascus, and that is what prompted Iran to launch 350 cruise missiles, drones, and ballistic missiles. And so one should not be surprised if the elimination of Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Iran's strongest proxy, would bring Hezbollah and Iran to declare even fuller, bigger scale war on Israel. At the end of the day, we have seen strikes on Tel Aviv, and it appears that, if not Hezbollah, one of its proxies has attempted.
Well, we're seeing reports now that the sirens that just sounded across central Israel come after an apparent ballistic missile attack from Yemen. So that would be the Houthis out of Yemen. Again,
the Arrow system successfully intercepted.
Right, which this is really the second time we've seen that from Yemen specifically
in
over
a week, three times in a month. Prior to that, they had not reached Israel, and so we are seeing a significant escalation from Yemen.
Obviously, I mean, for Israelis, very, I don't know if calming is the word that we want to use, but it is definitely calming to hear that the Arrow system effectively works when it comes to these ballistic missiles. The question is, what quantity of missiles being shot at Israel, what the actual efficacy is, because, from what we've been seeing, it's really just kind of been one missile at a time and not barrages of, 90, 100 missiles like we do see from Lebanon. By the way, the IDF says that around 90 rockets have been fired at Israel from Lebanon throughout the day as well, so we just got that update in as well. Okay, we're going to turn to Syria briefly, and then we're going to come back and continue talking about Iran and the potential fallout that we can see following the killing of Hassan Nasrallah. But over in Syria, videos circulating on social media show residents of the rebel-held region of Idlib, that would be in the northwest of the country, celebrating the assassination of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. Now, residents could be seen handing out sweets to passerbys, thanking Prime Minister Netanyahu, and also vowing that Syrian President Bashar al-Assad will be next in line. Well, Hezbollah has long been an ally of the Syrian regime under the Assad family. The terror group was essential in helping Assad fight and crush Syrian opposition uprisings from the Syrian public in the Syrian civil war, which began back in 2011. And joining us now is Omar Abu Layla. He's an executive director of the Deir Ezer 24. We're interested to hear why Syrians are celebrating at this point. Are they representative of the mass Syrian population? And how do they view Hezbollah?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Actually, why we surprised that Syrians are celebrating after the death or killing of Hezbollah top leaders and the other leaders, because we as Syrians, since 14 years, we don't forget all the criminals who they commit all the crimes in Syria, including Hezbollah. We do remember, and all the world know very well what kind of massacres Hezbollah has done in Syria against the Syrians. And those people, or the Syrians who they were celebrating last night, it's just part of what they have against this militia, because they did a lot of massacres, not only in Idlib, in Deir Zor, in Aleppo, in Idlib, in Damascus, in the country of Damascus. We don't forget these criminals. So this is absolutely a normal reaction from the Syrians. And we will see more and more, especially after the official announcement of the killing of Hassan Nasrallah. Absolutely.
If Israel manages to successfully dismantle Hezbollah's military capabilities within Lebanon, how is that going to end up impacting Syria and the Syrian public?
Yeah, a very good question. Today, the announcement of that the IDF, after announced officially that they killed Hassan Nasrallah and the top leaders of Hezbollah, it will absolutely impact and affect the militia in Syria, because we know very well Bashar Assad was he's still so weak without this militia. We talk about the IRGC, Hezbollah, Fatimiyun, other militia as well. So when we talk about the top leaders of this militia got killed, absolutely will affect their militia on the ground. We talk about the short and the midterm, especially now. And they are afraid, what is the next scenario since Israel assassinated our top leaders who planned and managed us since years. We talk about Qasem Soleimani, we talk about Hassan Nasrallah, we talk about other top leaders of the IRGC who they got killed in Damascus. And now today we talk about also Hassan Nasrallah with the other from Radwan Force and others who's coming tomorrow, we don't know yet. But these militia in Syria, now they have two things. Number one, they are not in full trust with their militia leadership after the assassination of the top leaders. Number two, they are also not in a trust with the Assad regime since it's silent, or this regime is silent, and they cannot release any statement or any kind of support to this militia. Especially the Israelis are very clear against Bashar Assad, said it, that if you involved in any kind of this conflict, you will be the next target.
Right. Now, we know that Israel took control of Beirut's airport command center today and forced an Iranian cargo plane to turn around that was carrying IRGC weapons. How can we expect Israel to target weapons making their way through Syria into Lebanon?
Yeah, Israel every couple of days targeting these militia, not only recently since they announced even about the Beirut airport, and they just send a direct message to the Islamic Republic regime that you cannot send any more weapons to Hezbollah after we assassinate or kill the top leaders of Hezbollah. No, they have the other ways how they following these shipments or these trucks coming from outside. Like, take an example, how many times the Israelis hit this shipment from Iraq in Syria, even inside Syria, in Homs, in Al-Qusayr. So Israel knows exactly when and where and how these moving between many capitals, Arabic capital, we talk about from Iraq to Damascus to Beirut. So they keep watching all the ways, and they are not only focusing on Beirut military airport, so they also keep watching the other borders from the Iraqi side and the Syrian side. I will not be surprised if we see soon also strikes in Syria or in Iraq, because they still keeping watching it as well.
Right. All right. Well, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us, giving us some insight as to how the Syrian public feels about the ongoing escalation that we're seeing in Lebanon. We're going to turn now to northern Israel, right on the border with Lebanon, where our correspondent Zach Anders is joining us live. Zach, obviously, you probably got the notifications on your phone up in the north, but we just saw a ballistic missile attack from Yemen in the center. What is the latest in terms of rocket fire that is coming in to the north of the country from Lebanon?
Yeah, about 30 minutes ago, we had another alert here in the north for Shlomi. The apparent attack, as far as we can tell, no casualties or any reports of damage that have come across. Again, that's 30 minutes old, though, so we will continue to monitor that here. We're at the medical center where some of these casualties would be brought here in the north, the Galilee Medical Center outside Nahariya. The messaging that we're seeing from Hezbollah right now, they've claimed 8 attacks. So their social media department is still intact as they've been continuing to put out all of these messages. One of them here at the just about 40 minutes ago, I found interesting. This is translated from Arabic. It says, quote, "We are highly confident that Hezbollah will overcome this great calamity, and the leader will be succeeded by competent leaders who will continue the path that the martyr paved with his blood and the blood of his brothers. The terrorist leadership of the enemy, which has experienced a temporary euphoria and is intensifying its criminal actions, will realize after a while that it is walking with its feet towards inevitable demise at the hands of the Mujahideen and loyal sons of our nation. You know, as you look across the border, we're seeing a lot of the images coming out of Beirut, not just of these airstrikes, but of the thousands that have been displaced from southern Lebanon that have made their way into Beirut. There's been an interesting report that I just watched on Al Jazeera, actually, of many of these hundreds of these people that are sheltering in the streets of Beirut right now are upset with Hezbollah. They're receiving no messaging, nowhere to go. They are not receiving supplies, and they're blaming Hezbollah at this moment for their current calamity that's taking place on the streets of Beirut, guys.
All right. Thanks so much, Zach, for that update. We're going to be back with you later on in the hour with continued updates from the north of Israel. I'd like to turn back to our guests in the studio. Doron, obviously, you know, this missile launch from Yemen, not the first that we've seen, but certainly a message that the other members of the so-called Axis of Resistance, Iran's octopus, are invested, that they're going to continue to defend Hezbollah to the extent that they can. But still, obviously, we're not seeing yet what appears to be a major response from Hezbollah. Why do you think that is?
No, I think they have to calibrate. First of all, they have to evaluate where do they stand. This is a dramatic blow. Think of us after the 7th of October. It took us 3 weeks to get our forces and go and go inside Gaza. So think about them. They are really. This is a blow that they have really to think, where do they stand? What do they have in their hands? Where are the commanders? Where are the caches? Where are the launchers and so on? And also the other proxies in Yemen and Iraq and everywhere. I think we have to be very careful also as Israelis about abroad, about attacks, possible attacks against senior Israeli institution abroad, because this might be one of one of the ways they will take on forward. But I want to add another remark. We have to be very careful when we go to Syria and we have people celebrating our success in Beirut. There was a civil war in Beirut. There was a civil war in Syria. We should never participate in those civil wars. Whenever we try to participate in the civil wars and join forces with one of the groups, we ended, as was in the 80s, with a bitter lesson. So we have to be careful. Protect our interests. Okay, we know what we want. We want the buffer zone in the north. We want a new ruling in Gaza, a new power in Gaza. We want our hostages back. We want to see the West Bank calm, and we want people from the outskirts, I say outskirts, Yemen and Shia militia not to bug us. And then we have Iran as a sort of a coalition, as part of the way we work the coalition, to see what to do with Iran.
All right, well, we're going to be going out for a quick commercial break right now. Do not go anywhere. We are still here live on I-24 News for the next hour with the latest updates as to the escalated fighting that we're seeing between Israel and Hezbollah, and of course, the targeted assassination of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. I'm Natasha Kirchuk. This is I-24 News. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back shortly.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are? Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website. On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it. So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
Shalom and welcome to Jewish World Weekly. I'm Khaled Ben-David, and each week we're going to bring you the latest from the Jewish world, from politics to religion, entertainment to the latest trends, and everything in between. Join me each week as we explore the global Jewish diaspora. Don't miss Jewish World Weekly only on I-24 News.
I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and this is I-24 News. We're opening with breaking news. It is official. The Hezbollah terror group has confirmed that its leader, Hassan Nasrallah, has been killed in an Israeli airstrike in the Lebanese capital of Beirut. Now, this is major news that has shaken the Middle East as a whole. It comes after the IDF conducted a massive airstrike on Hezbollah's main headquarters in Beirut yesterday evening, where Nasrallah was gathered with other top Hezbollah commanders. Now, the attack leveled 6 buildings. It marks the heaviest response from Israel in Beirut since Hezbollah started firing rockets into Israel on October 8th of 2023, just a day after Hamas's attack on southern Israel. Now, Lebanese health officials say that at least 6 people were killed and over 90 were injured in yesterday's strike. Hezbollah, for its part, has fired over 9,000 rockets into Israel over the course of the last year. But the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah really escalated sharply over the last 2 weeks, with Israeli attacks and airstrikes on the terror group killing more than 800 people in Lebanon, according to the Lebanese health ministry. This figure does not distinguish between combatants and civilians, and Israel says that most of those dead are Hezbollah fighters. Well, Hezbollah and Iran are now vowing a strong response, and the Lebanese terror group has been firing rockets into Israel and the West Bank throughout the day. We also saw a ballistic missile fired into Tel Aviv from Yemen as well. Now, turning to Lebanon specifically, the public is reeling as the IDF continues to strike Hezbollah targets across the country and in Beirut. Lebanese officials say, like I mentioned before, that nearly 800 people have been killed in these strikes since Monday. But the IDF says that most are Hezbollah targets. At the same time, reports are coming out of Lebanon of locals being displaced overnight from the southern Shiite suburbs of Beirut, where Hezbollah infrastructure is primarily located. We know that Lebanon's transport ministry has also told an Iranian cargo plane to turn around following threats from Israel that it would be targeted for carrying weapons. While the EU has said that airlines should avoid Lebanese and Israeli airspace for the next month. Well, joining us now is Mariam Yunus. She's a Lebanese woman who's living here in Israel. What are we hearing from the Lebanese public right now, especially in regards to Nasrallah's killing? Are locals supportive of this? Are they angry about it?
Yeah, so Natasha, I don't know how many knows, but obviously the Lebanese public is divided by this news because Hezbollah has its own base of supporters that obviously they are very sad to his killing. And of course, he was like a very main and very central personality in the Lebanese politics and in the region. Politics. But on the other hand, Nasrallah is responsible with his terrorist militia to the death of thousands of Lebanese people and Syrian people. And he's responsible of taking this country, my country, to a war the Lebanese people didn't want even. And let alone the fact that they are responsible for the killings of Syrian that opposed the Syrian regime, and the blast of the port in 2020 because of their weapons that were stored in the port that caused the death of thousands and injuries of thousands of Lebanese. So, of course, the majority of the Lebanese people are very happy that he is finally eliminated, and they are hopeful that this will open a door to a better future to Lebanon and to the region, you know, whether through agreement with Israel or other political changes that will happen in the region.
Now, how are you feeling? I mean, are you worried about your country and where this is headed? And how widespread is the damage at this point from what you've understood from your friends and family on the ground?
So, talking personally, I am a daughter of an SLA commander. My dad was in the southern Lebanese army, the last army that actually fought Hezbollah on the ground in Lebanon. And in 2000, we had to flee our country because of Nasrallah and the proxy that they threatened to slaughter us in our beds because we fought them as an outsider entity. We knew back then that they are not Lebanese. So I am a victim of this, you know, proxy. Of course, I'm worried about my country. I'm worried about the innocent people that are paying the price of this ideology, this crazy ideology that has been going on for so long, killing people and just disturbing this region over and over again just for political reasons. So on one hand, I am worried for my country. I again hope that this will mean the end of Hezbollah and an agreement between Lebanon and Israel, a peace agreement, so I can finally visit my country and meet my family that I've never seen in my life. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, I know the importance of eliminating Hezbollah. I know that the Lebanese people knows that Israel and the IDF are attacking specifically Hezbollah bases and specifically its power, and they are trying as much as possible, obviously, to not hurt any civilians. It's very hard as Hezbollah operates from populated areas, as we see, but it's war, and I'm really praying for the fast end of it. Absolutely. And for peace.
All right, Mariam, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us. Very interesting to hear your insight. Now, just a quick update here. The IDF says that the missile that was fired from Yebin towards central Israel, towards here in Tel Aviv, was actually shot down outside of Israel's borders. It was a surface-to-surface ballistic missile that was shot down, like I said, by air defenses. That would be the Arrow long-range missile defense system just outside of Israel's borders. We are going to be following this up down the line with more information. But we're going to turn now to the Israel-Hamas war. It is day 358 of that war. This escalation in Lebanon is, of course, part of it, but it seems that all the international focus has shifted to the fighting between Lebanon and Hezbollah rather than Israel, or sorry, between Israel and Hezbollah rather than Israel and Hamas. Now, there appears to be no progress forward in a hostage release and ceasefire deal with Hamas. The only thing that we're hearing from the Palestinian terror group at this point is that Hamas extends its condolences to Hezbollah for the, quote, martyrdom of its leader, Nasrallah, in that Israeli airstrike that we saw last night. Now, at the same time, the family members of the 101 Israeli hostages who are still being held captive in Gaza are continuing to protest and call for an immediate deal. We're going to see them gathering once again this evening on the streets of Tel Aviv, despite, I'm assuming, the fact that there are IDF Home Front Command directives, specifically that there are gatherings of no more than 1,000 people, but it's hard to believe that those families won't be out there protesting to some extent. And joining us now in the studio is political commentator, Ambassador Daniel Sheikh. He's also the Director of Diplomacy, Hostage and Missing Families Forum. We're going to turn to you in a second on this issue. We also have the former head of regional affairs at the Israel National Security Council. That would be Shiri Fein-Grossman, sitting right next to me, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osran, who is going to be here with us for the next hour. All right, Daniel, I have to turn to you because I think one of the questions on everybody's mind is how the escalation in Lebanon that we're seeing is going to impact negotiations in the Gaza Strip with Hamas.
You know, it's very so many times repeated truism to say that the attention has shifted to the north, and that is a very bad thing. You know, I keep trying to think of ways to bring the attention back to a one-year-old tragedy that is unresolved, a one-year-old war that is not won, rather than just bathe in the admiration, the real admiration and justified admiration for the successes in the north. But I think there's a lesson to be learned, that if facing Hamas, which is so much weaker than Hezbollah, during an entire year of military action, we haven't achieved a tipping point, then we should probably think twice before entering a 1 or 2 or 3 year long war with Hezbollah. What I'm saying is that probably the merit of these military successes will be in their ability to push Hezbollah to a negotiated deal. And that was supposed to be the same system facing Hamas. It was the Prime Minister who said so all the time. He said, we have two objectives: to eliminate Hamas and to liberate the hostages. Nearly 1 year in, neither one nor the other have been achieved.
You know, Sherry, I'd like to kind of hear your input on this as to whether or not the escalation that we're seeing in Lebanon is necessarily a good or a bad thing for the overall picture of the multiple fronts that Israel is facing. We know that on October 7th, this was a massive security failure for the state of Israel. Not only the public lost its confidence in the Israeli military, but we saw kind of the weakening of Israel's image within the Arab world. You know, Iran all of a sudden saying, wait a second, this is not the strong army that we thought we were dealing with, and all of a sudden that seems to be shifting within the course of the last 2 weeks as a result of Israel's clear successes in taking out almost every single member of Hezbollah's top command structure. So I guess the question right now is, you know, when we're looking at the overall balance here, obviously there's the security issues, ensuring that, you know, Israelis in the north are able to go back home, ensuring that Israel as a whole is safe. But there's also the international image issue here, which is, of course, headlines still covering, saying that Israel's attacks on Hezbollah in Lebanon are killing civilians again, and basically we're looking at round 2 of what happened in Gaza.
Yeah. So there's a lot to take in that question. Look, we are at an historic point in the Middle East, and this time will determine where we stand in the Middle East for maybe a decade or more. Regarding Gaza, there is a way that we can leverage what is happening to bring about a hostage deal, although, you know, why we couldn't do it till now and we'll suddenly be able to, it's not clear. The only way is that if Sinwar understands that he's lost his card of the Hezbollah assistance that he thought he may have. But this although depends on how Iran is going to act. So it's still early to tell. There is kind of this option looming, but it doesn't seem very realistic. The main issue is that the Israeli government has to come up with an alternative to Hamas. If it doesn't, you know, the youth in Gaza will keep being drawn to Hamas, as he has no other force to be drawn to. And what we're seeing up north, again, we're going to need statesmanship, but I have to commend the people that are in control right now. We've seen very, very impressive attacks from the IDF. But I think the most important thing strategically going forward is that up till now, the IDF has made it very clear that we're targeting Hezbollah and not the other factions in Lebanon, not other, not Sunni, not Jews, not Christians, but very targeted on Hezbollah and its areas. And I hope that will continue to be so, and with minimum casualties to civilians as possible. If we'll be able to keep that going, I think we'll get to a lot of achievement.
Right. Of course, again, headlines, international headlines, when they're covering what has happened in Lebanon over the course of the last 2 weeks, do not distinguish between Hezbollah militants killed versus civilians. But I'm
not quite sure you're right, especially Hezbollah, because Hezbollah has an international dimension, and there are certain countries in the world who have suffered from Hezbollah actions, contrary to Hamas, which is very local.
I mean, we're seeing celebratory videos in Syria. We're seeing celebratory videos
I'm talking
out of
about
Iran
the US,
itself.
I'm talking about France. They all have casualties from Hezbollah activities.
And specifically
Argentina.
Nasrallah as well.
Yeah.
But again, the question is, I mean, when you're looking at social media and you see the commentary, let me tell you, it is definitely concerning in terms of how Israel looks. But I actually want to turn to Sinwar, who you mentioned, because we have seen reports, and Ariel Isran, this question is for you. We have seen reports that Hamas leaders have been directed not to move, that they're not to take any meetings within Lebanon anymore. What are we hearing in terms of what this means for Sinwar, specifically the leader of Hamas?
Well, Sinwar is still believed to be under some tunnel in the Gaza Strip. As far as reports coming out of American intelligence and American media, there hasn't been much contact with him over the past few weeks, and perhaps even more than that, and that has also strained talks, which are currently frozen, even though Israeli mediators are maintaining contacts with other negotiators to try and keep hopes alive. But as far as Hamas's engaged participation in these negotiations to keep them alive, that's non-existent. But really the focus has been shifted from Gaza to Lebanon. That does enable for the campaign to continue in Gaza, and with the IDF's ground operation really dwindling down to just a few pockets of fighting, Hamas's civil leadership is re-emerging in many of the areas. We have to remember that the humanitarian aid going into the Gaza Strip, commandeered by Hamas and sold to the public, is what's keeping, it's the oxygen line for Hamas, and that is a threat moving forward. Hamas does not appear to be in any rush to end the current situation in Gaza. However, there are the military strain that they are under has been weakened with the focus, as Israel has said and now proven over the past 2 weeks, the focus has shifted now to the north.
All right, we are going to continue this discussion with a guest who is joining us. Like I mentioned briefly, Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar and other Hamas officials in Gaza have reportedly seized their movements as a precaution following the killing of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. Now, that is according to Saudi media. The Al Arabiya news outlet says that Sinwar's security has been switched in recent days and that Hamas officials have stopped going to meetings in Lebanon. Well, joining us now is I-24 News senior editor Ali Waqid. So, Ali, you know, what does Nasrallah's killing specifically and the escalating fighting in Lebanon mean for Gaza and the Palestinian public in your perspective?
First, it means that their most important ally, for Hamas at least, their most important ally is very weakened. Nasrallah was not only the most important ally, he led the process of bringing back Hamas to the Iranian axis. He led the process of the reconciliation between Hamas and the Syrian regime. And with Hamas, they orchestrated what they call the common operations room, from which they led what they called the multi-front war against Israel. The fact that Nasrallah is no more with us, and the fact that Iran doesn't come to save Hamas from the very intensive pressure of Israel make Hamas very much worried. I think that Hamas is watching the process in which Hezbollah is now passing through, and the fact that the Iranian reaction is very weak, and it proves to Hamas that they had no one to count on. Hezbollah is facing now a heavy coup from the Israeli, and Hamas has no one more to count on. We know that Hamas leadership was in Beirut, was located even in the Dahia of Beirut. The first assassination in Dahia, by the way, was for Salah Harouri, the number 2 of Hamas, and not of Hezbollah senior leader. And I think the situation of Hezbollah now is adding the desperate situation in which Hamas is.
Right. And of course, I mean, there's very much mixed messaging coming out of the mouths of Iranian public officials. On one hand, you do hear the Iranian supreme leader vowing a major reprisal in the name of Hezbollah. On the other hand, there's the Iranian president, Pezeshkian, who's basically saying, you know, we need to focus on internal issues, the economic crisis in Iran, and we can't continue funneling all this money to these proxy groups. So what does that ultimately mean for Hamas?
It means that they will receive less money from Iran and eventually less support from Iran. When Pezeshkian said, we want to have good relations with the U.S., we want to have good relation with our neighbors, it means that he has a different approach of the foreign policy of the Iranian Islamic Republic, which is not necessarily the policy of the Revolutionary Guards. And this is the main tension in Iran between the president, this reformist president, and between the Revolutionary Guard that led the exportation of the Iranian revolution to the world, mainly to the Middle East. And if Pezeshkian is fulfilling what he promised the Iranian public during the election campaign, I think Hamas and Hezbollah are in deep trouble.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. That's our senior editor here at I-24 News, Ali Waqid, with some insight as to how Hamas views this escalating conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. But we're going to turn to Haifa right now. That is Israel's largest city in the north, which has come under fire, very heavy fire in recent days. Our correspondent, Nicole Tzedek, is joining us live there. Nicole, you know, we spoke about this before. Until last week, Hezbollah really wasn't targeting Haifa or most of the other areas of northern Israel, but that has certainly changed. And how has the city been affected so far? What are we hearing from locals today?
We've certainly seen this change over the past week, and so residents here knew that at some point there would be this turning point as Hezbollah continued to vow to attack Haifa at some point, especially as things do escalate. Today, however, no sirens actually sounding in Haifa, but all of these surrounding areas, there have been sirens forcing hundreds of thousands of people to run into their homes and into their shelters. And so the residents here know that it's just a matter of time, but they say that they are still prepared. They say that it's a very, very tense time, the most tense it's felt since the beginning of this war. So over the past year, they say now things feel different. However, they're not necessarily living in fear. There's still many people actually coming out here to look over the beautiful viewpoint here in Haifa. But I do want to say, I think one of the reasons people are coming out here is because the amount of journalists that are here as well. It's just lined with different cameramen waiting for whatever might happen. But I spoke to some of the residents that live in Haifa and were walking their dog earlier today. Jonathan, who lives right here, listen to what he said about the mixed emotions he's feeling right now.
You know, it's like both scary and happy. On the one side, of course, it's happy because these big terror man that made a lot of bad things, killed a lot of Israelis, killed a lot of innocent people. On the other end, now it's scary because we are next. Now, after Nahariya and Akko, we know we are the next major city. And after this kind of action, it's obvious that he will target us. So it's tense, it's intense, but it's like both directions. Also happy, also, you know, very scary.
So it's this feeling of, on the one hand, happy that the IDF was able to attack Hassan Nasrallah. And so many of the citizens are feeling proud, almost celebratory, but they know that that celebration is going to be short-lived because they understand the ramifications of such an attack. And honestly, throughout the course of the day, many of them are surprised that there haven't been sirens here quite yet. And so they're prepared for whatever might happen throughout the coming hours, throughout the coming days. And they say, unfortunately, Haifa is no stranger to these type of sirens, but there certainly is a different sense of worry following yesterday's assassination.
All right, that's Nicole Tzedek joining us from Haifa, the largest city in northern Israel. We're going to have you with us later on in the hour. All right, I'd like to turn back to our guest in the studio. Ariel, I want to turn to you right now. Again, I'm asking this question because I just know so many of our viewers are watching. They want to know what kind of response we can actually expect from Hezbollah at this point. And I think the underlying question there is what capabilities does the terror group have at this point following the massive airstrikes and attacks that we've been seeing from the Israeli military, not only in southern Lebanon, but across Beirut?
Well, my answer might change before I finish, because as we speak, the IDF announcing that it is currently conducting a precise strike in the Dahia area of Beirut. This is the third strike in recent hours in the Hezbollah stronghold in southern Beirut. It begs to ask the question, who is left to take out? But these operations are continuing, and with the goal to further degrade Hezbollah's capabilities, whether it's command and control. I think that it's the most significant aspect of Hezbollah that has been degraded only in the past 2 weeks. Israel continues to target Hezbollah's weapons caches. That is perhaps the remaining strategic threat right now, provided that the Radwan forces may still not be able to carry out a ground operation. Those are the two main threats that remain. As far as percentage, we can't really put a number on it. But at the end of the day, Israel has for months targeted Hezbollah's arsenal, which consists of 150,000 rockets and missiles that can be launched at Israel. Over the past 2 weeks, as I mentioned, really amplified that to hurt their capabilities, because you would expect a harsher response from what we're seeing now. They responded harsher following the elimination of Abu Nameh, of Haj Talib Abdallah. All these regional commanders for Hezbollah have been their elimination was met with a fiercer, immediate response by Hezbollah. But I do just want to note, all the foreign leaders are warning that Israel may be dragging the situation to a regional war. Hamas attacked Israel unprovoked. Hezbollah attacked Israel unprovoked. The Houthis, Iraqis, Iran as well. And only in the last hour, this is the current situation of Israel's regional war, that it is already in it. Rockets launched by Hezbollah in Lebanon to the western Galilee. This was within the last hour. The Houthis launched a ballistic missile at central Israel. Clashes with Palestinian gunmen in Nablus in the West Bank, and the IDF carrying out an airstrike in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. This is the security reality that Israel is currently engaged in, and it was dragged into this by its regional enemies.
Right. I mean, obviously, Iran has been saying the so-called axis of resistance is now going to come together. We're going to see multiple attacks from different fronts and different proxy groups. Hezbollah was obviously the strongest proxy group that Iran had in its arsenal, per se.
It still is, in terms of what its capabilities.
Right. The question is, of course, when it comes to those longer range missiles, per se, which Israelis are the most concerned about, what kind of damage has been made there?
To my understanding, not as much as we've seen in the mid and shorter range rockets that Hezbollah has tens of thousands of. These more strategic long-range missiles are considered to be really Iranian weapons, Iranian missiles. And so targeting that would be seen by Iran as an escalation. I think Israel has no problem in continuing.
I mean, is there... this seems to be the escalation, right?
Well, Iran is slow to act. And we've seen this because they're in this for the long game. They're in for the war of attrition. And so Israel's in no rush to aggravate their missiles. They have no problem, the Iranians, in sending the Arabs of the region, their proxies, to do the dirty work for them.
Okay, we're going to continue this conversation after the commercial break. I know everybody wants to contribute. Don't go anywhere. We're going to be back shortly. I'm Natasha Kirchuk. This is I-24 News. We'll see you soon.
Introducing the brand new I-24 News Video On Demand app.
You'll have instant access to all our programs, reports, in-depth discussions, and expert commentary.
Whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News Video On Demand app today.
Shalom and welcome to Jewish World Weekly. I'm Khaled Ben-David, and each week we're going to bring you the latest from the Jewish world, from politics to religion, entertainment to the latest trends, and everything in between. Join me each week as we explore the global Jewish diaspora. Don't miss Jewish World Weekly only on I-24 News.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
And we are back on I-24 News. I'm Natasha Kirchak, and thanks for sticking with us. Well, the Islamic Republic of Iran has been quick to threaten Israel with a reprisal attack following the killing of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has called on Muslims on Saturday to stand with the people of Lebanon. And joining us now is Benham Ben Taleblu. He's a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. All right, Benham, Iran says that it's going to be sending over forces to Lebanon, but how far is the Islamic Republic really willing to go at this point to support Hezbollah, which is its largest proxy group?
Great to be with you, Natasha. That's really the million-dollar question right now, as Israel is in the business of dismantling or pushing back Iranian proxies to its south in Gaza, to its west, to its east in the West Bank, and to its north with respect to Lebanese Hezbollah, and that exceptionally bold strike against the Secretary General, Hassan Nasrallah. I actually found the comment, it was less than half a page by Iran's Supreme Leader, to be rather meager and, in fact, weak. There was no promise of bloodlust or hard revenge that existed in the press releases and commentary after the killing of Haniya by Israel earlier this summer, or Soleimani by the U.S. In January of 2020. I think absolutely the Iranians understand how outgunned they are. And I think their only hope right now is to translate an Israeli military win into an Iranian political win in the medium to long term. If I had to guess, based on the comments in that press release, he's calling on the entire axis of resistance to fire at Israel. It remains to be seen if the Iranians will do so directly. But I will bring you this. Iranian semi-official news agencies are saying that the Quds Force commander in the area was also killed in this strike.
Right. Of course, I mean, that would essentially be considered a good enough reason for Iran to vow a much harsher response as it has in the past when we've seen the targeted killing of other of its commanders abroad, whether that's in Damascus or in Beirut. But, you know, here in Israel, the Home Front Command has changed its instructions. It says that gatherings of over 1,000 people are canceled in the center of the country. This essentially suggests rocket fire in the area. We did just see a ballistic missile fired from Yemen. You know, it would suggest that the proxy groups have the capability to continue attacks like this, and the leadership structure in Hezbollah is perhaps still in place to be able to make the kind of order to send long-range missiles into the center of Israel. But what role does Iran actually play in Hezbollah's decision-making at this point, in your opinion?
I mean, that's as much a technical and intelligence question as a political question, because do they have the means of communicating directly when the beepers, the walkie-talkies, the pagers, the phones are either all tapped or hit, when the group is forced to flee, when the command and control essentially dissipates, and even when the physical Iranian connective tissue, that local Quds Force commander, is indeed taken out in the same airstrike, it begs the question as to how tight can Tehran actually pull on the reins. The flip side of this coin is that Iran tends actually not to pull the reins in very tightly. They tend to respect local autonomy and local initiative, and that's what makes this proxy problem such a big military threat, is that it's quite responsive to local. So if the $1 million question is how will Iran respond, the $500,000 question is, will what's left of Hezbollah's command and control look at what's left of their arsenal through the prism of use it or lose it?
Mm-hmm. Now, you spoke about politics within Iran and kind of the impact that they could have on the decision-making that is made next. How does the internal political situation in Iran impact the Islamic Republic's support for Hezbollah and its other proxy groups at this point? Iran is facing a major economic crisis right now. We see very weakened support for the Islamic regime, and it's clear that Pezeshkian, the president, wants there to be more of a focus on these kind of local issues and regional ones.
Indeed, on the home front, he talks about local issues rather than regional ones. But I will say for the few months he's been, quote unquote, elected and inaugurated in office, he's talked a heck of a lot about Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah, warming ties with Russia and China, and even Western university students that he feels the need to defend as not being anti-Semites, while he defends a regime that kills their own university students at home. Listen, Pezeshkian and his ilk, that broader faction that supports him, are dangling one thing right now to bail out this regime as it's receiving stronger and stronger blows against Israel. And that one thing it's dangling is not the ability to improve the economy. It's actually the ability to use the nuclear issue as a human shield. Pezeshkian recently wrapped up his speech at the UNGA earlier this week in New York City. He's met with European foreign ministers on the sidelines. He's had press conferences. Iran's former foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, went on the media talking tour of many of the news shows in New York City. They're basically going to dangle the prospect of nuclear diplomacy to try to put political handcuffs on the success of Israel's regional military operations.
Mm-hmm. The question right now is whether or not any of the Western leaders are going to buy that. But Benham, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us. Really interesting to hear your insight. We're going to be turning back to our guests in the studio for some follow-up on everything that we just heard. You know, one of the things that Benham just mentioned was Russia and China's involvement in all of this. Obviously, we just saw comments coming from the Kremlin, Russia strongly condemning Israel's killing of Hezbollah leader Nasrallah, calling on Israel to stop hostilities in Lebanon. What does this ultimately mean for relations between Russia and China and Iran, given the fact that it appears that Iran is looking weaker than ever before in the international eye? Can we expect involvement from Russia, per se?
Russia is involved. There is an interdependency that has gone deeper and deeper ever since the war in Ukraine has begun. And we're seeing support by Russia to Hamas ever since October 7. And this is also because, you know, they're forming this alliance between Russia, Iran, and China. I think there's a big issue of influence on social media, the things that you alluded to before. Definitely influence campaigns by, you know, state actors are something that we've seen that's really bothered Israel, you know, student delegation, student protests and all that. We know Iran is there. We know that it's very much involved in trying to incite and even in the Israeli society to break it in within. And those tools are pretty powerful, and I'm sure they're trying to use it. Another thing that we've seen, according to reports, are certain missiles that they're supposed to maybe deliver to the Houthis that are being in negotiations between Iran and Russia. So that's another major thing.
All right. I want to turn to you. Ambassador Sheikh, specifically about the strength of Hezbollah at this point. You know, we were discussing with Ariel just what the weapons capabilities are at this point and what the communication structure is right now in Hezbollah, because at the end of the day, even with this massive weapons arsenal, even if much of it still is in existence and hasn't been destroyed by Israel, there does need to be a command of order for those rockets and missiles to be shot into Israel as feared. In your opinion, is Hezbollah severely weakened at this point?
Very good idea, Natasha, with two experts on defense and military, to turn to the one who is not. No, I'm serious.
I know what I'm doing.
I know. Yeah, you're doing it, and I really commend you, because sometimes you need an outside view, not the tunnel view. And I, you know, as a non-expert, I look onto this and I say to myself, the strategy, and I hope I'm reading it correctly, is not necessarily a strategy of technically downgrading the numbers, simply the numbers of potential missiles, because there are too many. I mean, we're talking about 150,000 potential missiles.
Right.
It's just too much. So the system is more one of deterrence. You hit the soft spots, you hit where it hurts, and you hit more and more and on, and you just make these people think, is it worth retaliating massively, or am I taking too much of a risk? So my answer is, I don't know what exactly the plans of Hezbollah are, but the fact that they haven't responded massively to either of the eliminations, the political and the command eliminations, until now, doesn't mean that they don't have the capability to do it. And therefore, I would strongly recommend to the Israelis to listen to the voices of the Home Command and to not be too euphoric and saying, well, maybe in the end they're not so dangerous and it's just a lot of talk, etc., etc. I think the capability is there, and I hope the deterrence works, because that would in the end bring Hezbollah, and possibly under the advice of the Iranians, to sit down and find a way for Israelis to return to their homes in the north of Israel without physically trying to eliminate each Hezbollah member who is south of the Litani River.
Right. You know, I just want to ask you a quick question before we turn to our next guest, which is obviously the role that politics plays in all of this, because we're looking at a situation, we've been looking at a situation in which there's been major disagreements between the IDF and the current Israeli government as to continued fighting in Gaza, with the IDF saying we need to end this now, we need a deal, and saying that we need to continue the fighting in Lebanon. Initially, it seemed like the Israeli government was against that. We're seeing a switch here. And what is this going to mean for the future of Netanyahu's political career, who we know has been losing support since the 7th of October?
So Netanyahu is the kind of prime minister who likes to own all the successes and never owns the failures. So he's celebrating, and rightly so. I'm not saying it's not justified, the successes in Lebanon, but that doesn't work. He has to own Gaza too, and owning Gaza too means ending that in a way that will bring 101 hostages back, and the sooner the better. We are nearing a really looming, terrible, just thinking of it, 1 year of captivity under horrendous conditions. It is as much his responsibility as the decision to eliminate Hassan Nasrallah.
All right, we're going to be turning back to our panel shortly. Now, let's turn to Iraq. Over the course of the last 2 days, multiple drones have been launched into Israel from Iraq. On Thursday, one of those drones hit the Eilat port in southern Israel, causing damage and lightly wounding 2 people. Iran-backed militias in Iraq have taken responsibility, and Israel is on alert for increased attacks from Iraqi territory. And joining us now is a former spokesperson of the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq. That would be Intifad Kanbar. So how can we expect Iraq to get involved following the killing of Hezbollah leader Nasrallah, and the fact that Iranian officials are saying that the so-called axis of resistance is now going to come together in some type of larger attack?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. It's very unfortunate what's happening in Iraq. We worked hard against Saddam, and we removed Saddam from power, hoping we will have a wise government which will avoid war other than the wars that Saddam threw us in Kuwait and with Iran, and hundreds of thousands of Iraqi young men were killed. Unfortunately, a few hundred of rogue militias, proxies of Iran now, throwing Iraq again in the same way into the abyss of war, very much similar to what Hezbollah has done to Lebanon and destroying Iraq. And unfortunately, the Iraqi government is incapable of controlling them. In fact, even worse, the Iraqi government is funding them. There's an item line in the Iraqi budget, believe it or not, which funds the PMF, which is the clout of all these militias. $3 billion. They're using government cards, they're using government IDs to bombard Israel, to bombard Jordan, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. So this is a situation that is not very promising. And unfortunately, when the Iraqi government is incapable of taking military action or legal action to arrest those people, other countries will do, including Israel and the United States.
Now, today, the Islamic resistance in Iraq says that it conducted yet another operation against Israel. How seriously do you think Israel takes the Iraqi threat? And is Iraq worried about Israel's response to these ongoing drone attacks?
My previous experience is the Israelis didn't take it very serious. And I indicated several times to friends here in Washington who are close to Israel, to some Israelis, that Iraq is a very dangerous place because Iraq now is a bridge for all those militias to cross from Iran, weapons, chemical weapons, and money. And also Iraq is if you want to call it, the economical lungs for Iran. Iran is funding Hezbollah totally now from Iraq, looting of oil revenues from smuggling of oil. The Wall Street Journal had a very long article about the smuggling of oil on behalf of Iran. The Iraqi Ministry of Oil becoming an agent for the Iranians to export their oil illegally and fund terror operations for Hezbollah and for Hamas. So they always say, follow the money. The money is now coming from Iraq. It's the biggest funder for terrorism. Not to mention that Iraq now holds a large number, about 200,000 militias on Iraqi government payroll. Right. Prime Minister Soudani was here in New York, and none of the U.S. government, unfortunately, none of the U.S. government confronted him, at least in the media, with this dilemma that how could your government be a United States ally and at the same time your government and your budgets funding militias that are listed on U.S. Treasury sanctions.
Intifad, that actually brings me to my next question. You know, reports of U.S. troops essentially withdrawing from Iraq. What will that mean for the country?
Well, that means for the country is we are basically going on a slippery slope quickly to war. While, you know, at the same time, the Kurds, which are the United States allies, where Kurdistan region is the only peaceful place, you don't see one missile came out from Kurdistan or a drone against Israel or against any region country. They are being thrown under the bus, and the Iraqi government is boycotting them and not paying the Peshmerga they're fighting for their salaries, while the illegal rogue militias, proxies of Iran, getting billions of dollars. This is a situation must not continue, otherwise Iraq will be in deep trouble, as it is now.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us. Really interesting to hear your insight. I'm going to turn back to our guests in the studio. Ariel, my eyes are focused on you because I think that, you know, one of the questions that everybody has right now is who will replace Nasrallah? Is there any plan B here for the terror group following his assassination?
Well, the believed plan B was the head of the executive council.
Or plan COD.
Hashem Safiuddin, but his fate is unknown. He may have been eliminated in yesterday's strike. And Safiuddin's deputy, Nabil Kaouk, is believed to be the target of one of 15 Israeli strikes on Lebanon's southern suburb, Dahya, in the past few hours. And so this is a constantly changing situation, and we know, at least according to Lebanese media, who the expected target was. We still don't know his fate, but this really raises the question in an organization that has really been disoriented in terms of its command and control of who calls the shots, who makes the final call. It's not clear yet who that is. Right. In the meantime, the field commanders are giving their own decisions to target Israeli communities to further the distance than previously. But again, we're not seeing this massive immediate response that we could have expected. In fact, we have seen more significant immediate responses by Hezbollah. So again, as to your question, who's going to take him, who's going to succeed him? The first name is Hashem Safieddin. We don't know if he's alive. Right. The second name, his deputy, Nabil Kaouk. He is believed to be the target of a current strike. And so the list can, I won't say goes on and on, because I think it goes on only at this point. And it will remain to be seen according to the confirmed the confirmed results of the strike.
Okay. Now, one of the issues that we really haven't touched much on is the United States and its role in what is going to come next here. We're seeing reports come out now that the U.S. was angry with Israel over the decision to go through with this airstrike targeting Nasrallah. Of course, they weren't given prior warning. They were given warning while the operation was already
underway.
On the way. And, you know, the airplanes were in the air. And, you know, the U.S. had been engaging with Israel and also with Lebanon, interestingly, the Lebanese government, on a ceasefire. What can we expect now in terms of Western involvement here?
I think the effort for a ceasefire will continue, you know, for what it's worth. I don't know how realistic it is now. You know, things can change very quickly. But you know, I'm not quite clear about the American position. As I said, there is a history, and I don't think there are many tears shed about Hassan Nasrallah in the U.S. But politically, it's problematic. We're 2 months before an election. And, you know, that always complicates things.
Shiri, quick comment on this?
We know that, I think what Israel, if I was the Israeli government, I would say, look, we've been very restrained for the last 11 months. You tried every diplomatic play you have in your book, and you weren't able to bring a solution in a diplomatic way to get the people, the residents of northern Israel, back to their homes. So we had no other alternative, and there's no going back from really the beeper and the walkie-talkies that we saw. It was ever since the IDF has pulled that operation off, there's only one way forward, and that is a very serious escalation. Right. And the United States is not in an easy position, but what it should do is trust that Israel has the abilities to really curb Hezbollah's functioning as a military force, a very strong military force in the region, and can bring it down to what it used to be, which is a guerrilla movement. And we should do the same with the Houthis. And I think our regional partners and neighbors should, and with our allies in the U.S. and the UK, for instance, we should combine forces to do this together. It's possible, and it can change the region for decades to come.
All right, we're going to turn to one of our correspondents right now in Haifa. That would be Israel's largest city in the north, which has come under heavy fire in recent days. Our correspondent, Nicole Tzedek, is joining us live from there. You know, I think that today, following the assassination of Nasrallah last night, there was the expectation that we would probably see barrages of rocket fire at Haifa, given the massive population living in this city. Obviously, Haifa was not targeted by the Hezbollah terror group prior to the last week or so. Tell us what locals are saying on the ground, and you know whether or not they're worried at this point about a major response.
Right now, Natasha, we are seeing a mix of emotions. Some of the residents are, on the one hand, elated to hear about the news of Hassan Nasrallah's assassination, but on the other hand, they are concerned about what that could mean for the residents here in Haifa if they do get under attack, as we have seen over the past week. But here on the promenade, I want my camera woman Maya to kind of show you an idea of what we're seeing right here, even as night falls. On the one hand, you have journalists lined up here, you can see in the camera, but look at everyone walking about, families as they're coming at the end of the weekend, the end of Saturday. People with their kids walking their dogs. This is what we've really seen throughout the day. A little bit quieter than usual, but when I'm speaking to many of these residents, on the one hand, they're coming here to see the large camera crews that have amassed in the area. Another reason they're coming right here to overlook the Haifa Bay is if there are any rockets more north of here, you can see those interceptions pretty well behind us, because even though it is a cloudy and dark night, if you go deep in the distance that is the border with Lebanon there. So there's a few reasons why the residents are coming out, and they say they are still vigilant, but they're not living in fear. And so that's why they're still going about their daily life right now, walking the kids, walking the dogs, enjoying the fresh air, but they know that in a moment's notice, they might have 1 minute to run to their shelter. And still, that's the dichotomy that so many of the citizens throughout the country right now are living in. On the one hand, trying to put their faith and their trust in the Israeli military's capabilities, but on the other hand, knowing that they have to stay alert and vigilant and ready to take action and listen to those instructions from the Home Front Command.
All right, Nicole, thank you for that update from Haifa, the largest city in northern Israel. Hopefully it's going to be a quiet night for the residents of Haifa. We're going to turn now to northern Israel, even farther north, right on the border with Lebanon, where our correspondent Zach Anders is joining us live. Zach, what is the latest from where you are right now? Where are you exactly? How many rockets have we seen fired from Lebanon so far? Give us the latest.
At Galilee Medical Center here, where the casualties from the north have often been brought to this location for treatment over the last several weeks, over the duration of this conflict, really. What we're watching right now, the border is quiet within the last hour. We have the IDF telling us through this point today, some 100 different projectiles have been fired from Lebanon into Israel. We don't have any significant reports of casualties or damage. What we're looking at in Beirut, we're paying really close attention to the news coming out there. We're seeing additional airstrikes inside Dahia, that southern suburb of Beirut. We're seeing Israeli reports that suggest potentially another high-level target was the intended focus there. There's also early preliminary reports within the last few minutes of shooting around the government palace in Beirut. Now, I want to temper some concern about those sorts of headlines because we've been seeing over the last 24 hours multiple reports of shootings, but it's turned out to be Hezbollah members firing into the air as this news of Nasrallah and his death has become official, at least based on Hezbollah's own statements. So some of this gunfire that they're hearing throughout the city has been correlated with what's normally a celebratory kind of thing, but also in mourning, firing small handguns and machine AK-47s, those sorts of things into the air in those moments.
All right, Zach Anders joining us from the border with Lebanon. Thank you so much for that update. All right, I'm going to turn back to our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osran, here in the studio with us. Just some final updates as to what we know about the ongoing IDF strikes that we've been seeing in Beirut and across the country.
Yeah, so reports coming from all across Lebanon, South Lebanon, Bekaa Valley, Israeli strikes, but also in Beirut, at least 15 reported Israeli airstrikes in Beirut's southern suburb, the Dahia, the Hezbollah stronghold. It's, I think all our viewers have become pretty familiar with the Dahia and its connection to Hezbollah. Lebanese media saying that the target of the strike was Nabil Kaouk. He's the deputy head of Hezbollah's executive council. Now, the current head of the executive council, Hashem Safiuddin, his fate remains unknown. It is believed that he was potentially in yesterday's bunker meeting with Nasrallah, with Ali Kalki, the head of Hezbollah forces in the south. The latter two were eliminated. Still no word as to Hashem Safiuddin. And the outcome of these strikes taking place in Beirut really are expected to shape the future, at least in the immediate time period, regarding Hezbollah, where it's going, and all its command and control abilities.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank our guests for joining us in the studio. You know, obviously, to everybody who's watching right now, if you're here in Israel or in Lebanon, stay safe, stay smart, stay near bomb shelters, any type of protective space that you have. We, of course, do not know what we're going to see in terms of a response from Iran, Hezbollah, or any of the proxy groups in the so-called axis of resistance. But we will be continuing with our coverage tomorrow on I-24 News. I'm Natasha Kirchak. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Shalom and welcome to Jewish World Weekly. I'm Khaled Ben David, and each week we're going to bring you the latest from the Jewish world, from politics to religion, entertainment to the latest trends, and everything in between. Join me each week as we explore the global Jewish diaspora. Don't miss Jewish World Weekly only on I-24 News.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
אפשר להחזיר אותם, זה מכורח המציאות וכורח הנסיבות, שאי אפשר להחזיר אותם אם אנחנו לא נסכל את כוח הדואן, את כל הירי נ"ט שמגיע בטווח קצר מהכפרים בדרום לבנון לקיבוצים בגבול, ולכן מלבד ההסכם יש פה באמת צורך אמיתי להשיב את התושבים לא רק בתחושת ביטחון, אלא בביטחון אמיתי.
אתה יודע מה, רק מאחר ואנחנו גם מסכמים שעה, אז אני כן אתעקש אולי, כי אין דמוקרטית כמו היהדות, ופרשת השבוע הזאת שאנחנו עכשיו מסכמים, בעצם מעברת המושכות ממשה ליהושע. משה אומר לו, לפעמים תפעל עם היוועצות עם האנשים. אלוהים אומר ליהושע, לא, תלך בכל הכוח עם מה שאתה מאמין. כלומר, עת להתייעץ, עת לפעול, עת להיות נחוש, ועת להכיל את הדעות המרובות, אבל זה לא בהכרח טוטליטרי, ההפך, לב ליבה של הדמוקרטיה.
הדמוקרטיה מתגוננת,
כן,
והצעדים על מנת להתגונן, הם יכולים להיות מאוד אגרסיביים.
לא, גם לאורך השנים, אם אנחנו היינו יוזמים או עושים משהו, היו נותנים לזה קונוטציה שלילית.
בדיוק.
אנחנו בדיוק ההפך. אנחנו צריכים לתת לזה קונוטציה חיובית.
טוב, חברים, אז נאפס שעה. מה אתם אומרים? השעה 7, השבת עוד לא יצאה, אז...
כבר קיבלנו דבר תורה נהדר ממך.
כן, ראית איך אני לא יכולה, משיחית שכמוני, תמיד דוחפת אביסה לטוירה. טוב, אז אנחנו, כן, רוצים להיזכר במיטב של מי שכבר לא איתנו. חסן נסראללה. הנה לקט של אמירותיו הזכורות ביותר.
أقول لكم يا شعبنا في فلسطين إن إسرائيل هذه التي تملك أسلحة نووية وأقوى سلاح جو في المنطقة والله هي أوهن من بيت العنكبوت والله هي أوهن من بيت العنكبوت وجوار حيفا وما قبل حيفا وما بعد حيفا وما بعد ما بعد حيفا ويروح يعمل هلا الإجراءات اللي بده إياها.
جميعا ذكرى ولادة رسول الله الأعظم حول أحداث عام كامل من جهاز، وهو يفترض أن 4000 جهاز موزعين على شباب حزب الله إخوة وأخوات في وحدات ومؤسسات مختلفة. المهم أن لا تسقطك الضربة مهما كانت كبيرة وقوية. وأقول לכם.
איננו עוד, אבל עכשיו בואו נשמע את ראש ממשלתנו, בנימין נתניהו, בערב קבלת שבת, עוד בניו יורק, שעות בודדות אחרי התקיפה בדחיה, לפני ההמראה חזרה ארצה, כך זה נשמע משם.
האויבים שלנו חשבו שאנחנו קוראי עכביש, כך אחד מהם נהג לומר. איזה קוראי עכביש? קוראי פלגה. גידי פלדה.
לא קורא עכביש, להקת אריות. כן, זה נראה לי ברור לכולם. נאמר שוב שלום לאורחינו היקרים כאן באולפן. עשינו איזה קיול מחדש בפתיחת השעה הזו. מורן אלוף, חוקרת איראן וחיזבאללה, חברת פורום דבורה, סגן אלוף במילואים עמית יגור לשעבר, סגן ראש הזירה הפלסטינית. ינון, שלום איתך, כתבנו הצבאי. איתנו גם אליהו יוסיאן, המומחה לאיראן, שלום ארבל, בכיר שב"כ לשעבר, ושב אלינו הישר מן התדרוך הפרשן הצבאי יוסי יהושע. יוסי.
כמה עדכונים. אחד, היה כאן ניסיון חיסול בשעה האחרונה של נביל קאוק. נביל קאוק יש לו תפקיד מאוד מאוד מעניין בחיזבאללה. הוא לא רק חבר במפלגה, יש לו תפקיד מבצעי, הוא סוג של ראש המלמ"ב. הוא אחראי לסכל את פעילות המודיעין הישראלית בארגון. הוא אמור למצוא את המרגלים, הוא אמור למצוא את היכולות,
תפקיד עסיסי.
תפקיד מאוד מאוד חשוב.
ראש המודיעין המסכל.
המסכל, אני מקביל את זה בישראל, כדי שיבינו, זה המלמ"ב במשרד הביטחון. ובנוסף, בעקבות החיסולים האחרונים, הוא גם קיבל סמכויות נוספות, לא רק במה שקשור להגנה, אלא גם בהתקפה, כי כפי שאת יודעת, אין עוד יותר מדי בכירים בארגון.
בתפקידו הקודם הוא היה ראש הזירה הדרומית של חיזבאללה. יש לו גם פן מבצעי.
יפה. אז
איש רב פעלים.
כן, אז ההקשר חשוב שהוא, והמודיעין שלו נפרץ בתקופה האחרונה, לא יקבל עוד הצטיינות על התקופה הזו. מה כן אנחנו רואים? רואים סגר עד כמה שניתן שצה"ל מטיל על לבנון, מעברים יבשתיים לא נותנים לעבור, בעיקר לא לאמצעי לחימה.
מסוריה,
כן. נכון, מסוריה. הציר הזה סגור ולהערכתי גם ייסגר. אני רק אזכיר שפעם כשישראל רצתה לתקוף באזורים האלה, היא תמיד נזהרה שבטעות פצצה לא תגלוש ללבנון, והיה לנו אירוע כזה ב-2014, למי שזוכר בכפר ג'נטה, שחיזבאללה אמר, עברתם את הגבול, לטענתו עברנו את הגבול, והוא יצר אירוע מאוד מאוד משמעותי ב-2014 בהר דוב, בעקבות מה שהוא הגדיר חציית הקו.
טוב, הכל התהפך, הלבנונים בורחים לסוריה לתפוס מחסה, הכל התהפך.
נכון, וראינו את האירוע מול המטוס, אותו מטוס איראני שהגיע ושב על עקבותיו. ישראל מטילה גם מצור בתחום הזה, לא תיתן למטוסים איראנים לנחות. אני מעריך שגם לא לכלים ימיים שיהיו חשודים, ואומר בכיר במטכ"ל את הדבר הבא, נסראללה זו רק תחנה בדרך, יהיו עוד פעולות. זאת אומרת, בארגז הכלים של ישראל יש עוד מספר תוכניות פעולה מול חיזבאללה. אנחנו רואים עוד סיכול ועוד סיכול, אנחנו גורעים יכולות, נמשיך לגרוע יכולות. חיזבאללה, נשאל אותו בכיר למה הוא לא יורה, אז יש לו בעיית פיקוד ושליטה. חלק מהיכולות גרענו לו. יש שם המון בלבול, אבל בסוף הוא אומר, לא להתבלבל, יכולת קיימת. יש לו יכולת קיימת לשגר למרכז, ולא רק למרכז. גרענו לו המון, ועדיין בהיקפים שהיו לו ערב המלחמה, יש לו מספיק כדי לשגר עד לטווחים ארוכים, לכן להישמע להנחיות פיקוד העורף, לכן הן מרחיבות יותר. העיניים גם של המטכ"ל נשואות טהרן, לראות מה קורה בציר הזה, מה הם יחליטו, האם מצטרפים או לא. ההבנה בישראל ירדה מלמעלה למטה, כשראש ממשלה אמר שאם האיראנים יגיבו, אם ישלמו, אז נראה לי שגם זה חלחל לצבא, ואם זה יקרה, אז לא נחזור על אירועי אפריל השנה, ותהיה תגובה.
נדמה שכולם מבינים, לא סיימנו, זה רק מתחיל.
לא רק מתחיל, זה ממשיך.
אבל ממשיך, או מתחילה פאזה חדשה, במשפט.
רוצה לחדד איזושהי סוגיה, בהמשך למה שיוסי אמר, סוריה. המיקום שלה הוא מאוד משמעותי. כרגע הוא דיבר על מצור שעושים סביב לבנון, אבל אם נסתכל, סוריה הפכה להיות מחוז איראני, הלכה למעשה. ואיראן די שולטת שם למול חולשתו של בשאר. ובאירוע הזה גם נידרש לתת לזה את הדעת בהמשך.
אנחנו כמובן נרחיב בהמשך, אבל ינון, שלום איתך כתבנו הצבאי, אתה עם עוד פרטים על מכלול האירועים שאנחנו רואים.
כן, אולי גם לטובת מי שהצטרף אלינו עכשיו, לטובת שומרי השבת.
עוד לא יצא, אוטוטו יוצאת. כבר יצא?
עכשיו בדיוק.
זה הרגע,
בדיוק.
בבקשה,
מי שסיים את ההבדלה,
סיכום שלך.
מדליק ויכול לקבל עכשיו סיכום של כל מה שקרה ב-24 השעות האחרונות. ראשית, רגע לפני שבת, שורה של מטוסי קרב תוקפים ב-83 טונות של חומר נפץ, רובע בתוך הדחיה בביירות, מתחת לבתי המגורים. ישנה את המפקדה המרכזית של חיזבאללה, אפשר להקביל אותה לבור בקריה, ושם מספר בכירים מרכזיים, ובראשם, כאמור, המזכיר הכללי של ארגון הטרור חיזבאללה, סייד חסן נסראללה. הוא מחוסל שם במקום, לצידו גם עלי קרקי. עלי קרקי, מפקד חזית הדרום, ישראל ניסתה לחסל אותו לפני מספר ימים, ולא הצליחה. חיזבאללה טענו שהוא עבר למקום בטוח, ככל הנראה זה היה המקום הבטוח שאליו הוא עבר, והוא חוסל יחד איתו, וגם דיווחים על כך שמפקד חזית לבנון בכוח קודס, בעצם יועץ של משמרות המהפכה, חוסל גם הוא. מה עוד? בהמשך אותו לילה.
זה מדהים, מדהים שיש עוד אחרי כמה
כן, ושאפשר להגיד את כל האירועים ההיסטוריים האלה בפשוט רצף של דיבור, כשבראשם...
ברצף של דיווחי עובדות, בכלל בלי פרשנויות, רק דיווחי פרטים.
חד משמעית.
כן.
אחרי החיסול של חסן נסראללה, עוד לפני שחיכו בישראל להבין האם חוסל או לא, כשהגיעו האינדיקציות החיוביות הראשונות, החליטו להעלות עוד הילוך מול חיזבאללה, והחלו לתקוף את מערך טילי חוף הים. למעשה, בלב הדחיה, מתחת לפני בתי מגורים ממוקדים, אזרחים קיבלו הודעת פינוי מיידי מבניינים ספציפיים. תוך קרוב לשעה הבניינים האלו נמחקו, ואיתם גם מערך משמעותי שנבנה במימון איראני, שהיה אמור לפגוע בספינות ישראליות ומשפיע למעשה על כל נתיבי הסחר שצמודים לחוף של לבנון. מה עוד? עכשיו, במקביל בצה"ל מעלים הילוך גם, אמר יוסי, בהטלת מצור על לבנון, בהטלת מצור על חיזבאללה. למעשה, מעברי הגבול בין סוריה לבין לבנון מותקפים בכל מסעית שמנסה להעביר אמל"ח. העיירות הקרובות שהיו קולטות את האמל"ח ומעבירות אותו מותקפות גם הן, גם מאזור הרמל, בצפון הגבול עם סוריה, וגם בדרום הגבול עם סוריה, יותר קרוב לגבול עם ישראל. ומיד אתמול בערב דובר צה"ל בעצם מנחה שאת התושבים הלבנונים תיזהרו ואל תאפשרו לטיסות אמל"ח איראניות לנחות בנמל התעופה רפיק חרירי. למעשה, הוא אומר, אם נראה שיש ניסיון להעביר אמל"ח דרך שדה התעופה הזה, אנחנו נתקוף גם את שדה התעופה הזה, דבר שנמנעו לעשות עד היום. בעצם מטילים מצור מוחלט, גם ימי, גם יבשתי, ועכשיו אנחנו רואים שגם אווירי, ורק ביממה האחרונה, שורה של תקיפות בדחיה, קרוב ל-20 תקיפות, אם אני סופר בעצמי.
ושום סימן שהולכים להאט או להפסיק, רק להמשיך. אלו האמירות שאנחנו שומעים מכל בכירי מערכת הביטחון, מכל הבכירים בהנהגה כאן בישראל. ינון, תודה רבה על העדכון הזה. נעשה עכשיו איזה סיכום נקודתי, נכון, אמת נכונה לשעתה, לשעה זו. אליהו יוסיאן, איך אתה רואה את פני הדברים?
הכל טוב ומבורך. אסור לשכוח שהשיעים בלבנון, אסור להם להישאר על גבולותינו. זה חומר נפץ. בסופו של דבר המלחמה הזאת עוד כמה חודשים תיגמר. בסופו של דבר אנחנו נצא מלבנון. השיעים בלבנון מזדהים באופן מובהק עם חזבאללה. ברגע שאנחנו מסיימים את המלחמה הזאת בעוד מספר חודשים ונצא מלבנון, הם מתחמשים עוד פעם מההתחלה. השטח של חגורת הביטחון, מה שמוגדר בחלק הצפוני של מדינת ישראל, אסור להישאר בידיים של השיעים הלבנונים.
האיראנים עלולים לעשות את הטעות להחליט להיכנס למערכה?
לא עכשיו, אבל בסיום המלחמה זה סביר מאוד להניח שהוא שוב פעם יתחילו לשפר את